Isn't the book getting so good? Oh my gosh. We've got about 20 chapters left. It's about that much to read. So we've read more than we have left. We're over halfway finished. We've hit this climax moment, the top point of action where everything's kind of coming together and our heads are going, ah! Now we're ready to start seeing those last few pieces fall into place. And that brings us to chapter 30. The next day was Zigzag's birthday, or so he said. Zigzag lay in his cot as everyone headed outside. I get to sleep in because it's my birthday. Then, a little while later, he cut into the breakfast line, just in front of Squid. Squid told him to go to the end of the line. Hey, it's my birthday, Zigzag said, staying where he was. It's not your birthday, said Magnet, who was standing behind Squid. Is too, said Zigzag. July 8th. Stanley was behind Magnet. He didn't know what day of the week it was, let alone the date. It could have been July 8th, but how would Zigzag know? He tried to figure out how long he had been at Camp Green Lake, if indeed it was July 8th. I came here on May 24th, he said aloud. So that means I've been here 46 days, said Zero. Remember, Zero is really good at math, right? He can pull those numbers out. Stanley was still trying to remember how many days there were in May and June. He looked at Zero. He'd learned not to doubt him when it came to math. 46 days. 46 holes. It felt more like 1,000. He didn't dig a hole that first day, and he hadn't dug one yet today. That meant he had dug 44 holes, if it really was July 8th. Can I have an extra carton of juice? Zigzag asked Mr. Sir. It's my birthday. To everyone's surprise, Mr. Sir gave it to him. That doesn't sound like Mr. Sir, does it? Stanley dug his shovel into the dirt. Hole number 45. The 45th hole is the hardest, he said to himself. But that really wasn't true, and he knew it. He was a lot stronger than he was when he first arrived. His body had adjusted somewhat to the heat and harsh conditions. Mr. Sir was no longer depriving him of water, so I guess Mr. Sir's face has healed and he's kind of gotten over what happened. After having to get by on less water for a week or so, Stanley felt like he had all the water he could want. Of course, it had helped that Zero dug some of his hole for him each day, but that wasn't as great as everyone thought it was. He always felt awkward while Zero was digging his hole, unsure of what to do with himself. Usually, he stood around a while before sitting off by himself on the hard ground, with the sun beating down on him. It was better than digging, but not a lot better. When the sun came up a couple hours later, Stanley looked for the thumb of God again. The mountains were little more than dark shadows on the horizon. He thought he could make out a spot where the top of one mountain seemed to jut upward, but it didn't seem very impressive. A short time later, the mountains were no longer visible, hidden behind the glare of the sun, reflecting off the dirty air. It was possible, he realized, that he was somewhere near where Kate Barlow had robbed his great-grandfather. If that was really her lipstick tube he had found, then she must have lived somewhere around here. Starting to put pieces together, isn't he? Zero took his turn before the lunch break. Stanley climbed out of his hole, and Zero climbed down into it. Hey, caveman, said Zigzag, you should get a whip. Then, if your slave doesn't dig fast enough, you can crack it across his back. He's not my slave, said Stanley. We have a deal. They're bartering, right? Zero is trading his service for the service that Stanley can offer, which is to teach Zigzag to read. It's a good deal for you, said Zigzag. It was Zero's idea, not mine. Don't you know, Zig, said X-Ray, coming over, Caveman's doing Zero a big favor. Zero likes to dig holes. He sure is a nice guy to let Zero dig his hole for him, said Squid. Well, what about me? Asked Armpit. I like to dig holes, too. Can I dig for you, Caveman? after Zero's finished?" The other boys laughed. "No, I want to," said Zigzag. "It's my birthday." So the other boys are not happy about the agreement that Stanley and Zero have worked out, are they? Zero kept at it. "Come on, Caveman, be a pal. Let me dig your hole." Stanley smiled as if it were all a big joke. When Mr. Pendanski arrived with water and lunch, Zigzag offered Stanley his place in line. "Since you're so much better than me." Stanley remained where he was. So Zigzag's trying to cause problems, isn't he? The boys are really nagging on and aggravating Stanley about the arrangement that he has with Zero to teach him to read. Stanley remained where he was. "I didn't say I was "You're insulting him, Zig," said X-Ray. "Why should Caveman take your place when he deserves to be at the very front? He's better than all of us. Aren't you, Caveman?" So now even X-Ray is no longer on Stanley's side, it seems. "No," said Stanley. "Sure you are," said X-Ray. "Now come on to the front of the line where you belong." "That's okay," said Stanley. Stanley doesn't want any part of it. "No, it's not okay," said X-Ray. "Get up here." Stanley hesitated, then moved to the front of the line. "Well, this is a first," Mr. Pendanski said, coming around the side of the truck. He filled Stanley's canteen and handed him a sack lunch. Stanley was glad to get away. He sat down between his hole and Zero's. He was glad that he'd be digging his own hole for the rest of the day. Maybe the other boys would leave him alone. Maybe he shouldn't let Zero dig his holes for him anymore. But he needed to save his energy to be a good teacher. He bit into his sandwich, which contained some type of meat and cheese mixture that came in a can. Just about everything at Green Lake came in a can. The supply truck came once a month. He glanced up to see Zigzag and Squid walking toward him. "I'll give you my cookie if you let me dig your hole," said Zigzag. Squid laughed. "Here, take my cookie," said Zigzag, holding it out for him. "No thanks," said Stanley. "Come on, take my cookie," said Zigzag, sticking it in his face. "Leave me alone," said Stanley. "Please eat my cookie," said Zigzag, holding it under Stanley's nose. Squid laughed. Stanley pushed it away. At the beginning of the book, Stanley was getting bullied, but he never defended himself from Derek Dunn, did he? But here, Zigzag and Squid are definitely acting as bullies, and Stanley stood up for himself. That was a big change in Stanley's character, isn't it? Zigzag pushed him back. "Don't push me." "I didn't." Stanley got to his feet. He looked around. Mr. Pendanski was filling Zero's canteen. Zigzag pushed him again. "I said, don't push me." Stanley took a step backward, carefully avoiding Zigzag's hole. Zigzag kept after him. He shoved Stanley and said, "Quit pushing." So who's the one that's actually pushing? It's not Stanley, is it? Stanley's still trying to back away and get away from him. "Lay off," said Armpit, as he, Magnet, and X-Ray joined them. "Why should he?" snapped X-Ray. "Caveman's bigger. He can take care of himself." "I don't want any trouble," Stanley said. Zigzag pushed him hard. "Eat the cookie," he said. Stanley was glad to see Mr. Pendanski coming toward them, along with Zero. "Hi, Mom," said Armpit. "We're just fooling around." No, they weren't. "I saw what was going on," Mr. Pendanski said. He turned to Stanley. "Go ahead, Stanley," he said. "Hit him back. You're bigger." Stanley stared at Mr. Pendanski in astonishment. "Teach a bully a lesson," said Mr. Pendanski. Zigzag hit Stanley on the shoulder with his open hand, so he kind of hit him like that. "Teach me a lesson," he challenged. Stanley made a feeble attempt to punch Zigzag. Then he felt a flurry of fists against his head and neck. Zigzag had hold of his collar with one hand and was hitting him with the other. The collar ripped and Stanley fell backward on the dirt. "That's enough," Mr. Pendanski yelled. But it wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. "Stop!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. The side of Stanley's face was pressed flat against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fists slammed off his arms and pounded his face into the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then suddenly, Zigzag was off of him. Stanley managed to look up, and he saw that Zero had his arm around Zigzag's long neck. Zero's the smallest one, right? Zigzag, much bigger. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he desperately tried to pry Zero's arm off of him. "You're going to kill him!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. Zero kept squeezing. Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell to the ground in different directions. Mr. Pendanski fired his pistol into the air. Whew! So we have the boys no longer getting along. They've just gotten into a fight. Not very good. Zero came to Stanley's defense, didn't he, though? The youngest boy, or the smallest boy, went after Zigzag and was doing pretty good for himself. The other counselors came running from the office when they heard the gun go off. They came running from the office, the tents, or out on the lake. They had their guns drawn, but holstered them when they saw the trouble was over. The warden walked over from her cabin. Uh-oh, now the warden's come in. Not good, right? "There was a riot," Mr. Pendanski told her. "Zero almost strangled Ricky." Remember, Zigzag is Ricky. The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. "What happened to you?" "Nothing. It was a riot." "Ziggy was beating up the caveman," said Armpit. Ah, so Armpit, even though he was joining in with Zigzag, kind of running his mouth, now he's kind of tattling and letting the warden know what happened. They don't want to fool around with the warden, do they? "Ziggy was beating up the caveman," said Armpit. "Then Zero started choking Zigzag, and I had to pull Zero off Zigzag. It was all over before Mom fired his gun." "They just got a little hot, that's all," said X-Ray. "You know how it is in the sun all day. People get hot, right? But everything's cool now." "I see," the warden said. She turned to Zigzag. "What's the matter? Didn't you get a puppy for your birthday?" So maybe it really is his birthday, right? "Zig's just a little hot," said X-Ray. "Out in the sun all day. You know how it is. The blood starts to boil." "Is that what happened, Zigzag?" asked the warden. "Yeah," said Zigzag. "Like X-Ray said, working so hard in the hot sun, while Caveman just sits around doing nothing. My blood boiled." "Excuse me?" said the warden. "Caveman digs his holes just like everyone else." Zigzag shrugged. "Sometimes." "Excuse me." "Zero's been digging part of Caveman's hole every day," said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. "I'm teaching him to read and write," said Stanley. "It's sort of a hole, or a trade. The hole still gets dug, so what does it matter who digs it?" He just questioned her authority. We know from past experiences. Does she like that? "Excuse me," said the warden. "Isn't it more important to learn to read?" Stanley asked. "Doesn't that build character more than digging holes?" "That's his character," said the warden. "What about your character?" Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. "Well, Zero, what have you learned so far?" Zero said nothing. Remember, he says, "I'm not stupid. I just don't like answering their questions." "Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing?" the warden asked him. "He likes to dig holes," said Mr. Pendanski. "Tell me what you learned yesterday," said the warden. "Surely you can remember that." Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendanski laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, "You might as well try to teach this shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero's." They are so mean to Zero. I just don't get it. "The at sound," said Zero. "The at sound," repeated the warden. "Well, then tell me, what does C-A-T spell?" Zero glanced around uneasily. Remember, he hates to be singled out and questioned. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. "Cat," said Zero. Mr. Pendanski clapped his hands. Bravo! Bravo! The boy's a genius. F-A-T, asked the warden. Zero thought a moment. Stanley hadn't taught the F sound yet. F, Zero whispered. F. At. Fat. How about H-A-T, said the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound either. Zero concentrated hard, then said, chat. All the counselors laughed. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pendanski. He's so stupid, he doesn't even know he's stupid. I really would like to do some very mean things to them. They're so mean to Zero. I don't like it. Stanley didn't know why Mr. Pendanski seemed to have it in for Zero. If Mr. Pendanski only thought about it, he'd realize it was very logical for Zero to think that the H made the ch sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging anyone else's hole, said the warden, and no more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, said the warden. She turned to Stanley. You know why you're digging holes? Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole for you, then you're not learning a lesson, are you? I guess not, Stanley mumbled, although he knew they weren't just digging to learn a lesson. She was looking for something that belonged to Kissing Kate Barlow. So what is the warden looking for? Remember when Trout and Linda Miller showed up at that cabin that Kate Barlow was living in and demanded the loot? And then Kate Barlow died before they found the loot. What are they digging for? Why can't I dig my own hole, but still teach Zero to read? He asked. What's wrong with that? He's questioning the warden. Not very smart, is it? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It causes him stress, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you mean well, Stanley, but face it, Zero's too stupid to learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pendanski handed him the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good for. Zero took the shovel. Then he swung it like a baseball bat. The metal blade smashed across Mr. Pendanski's face. His knees crumpled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The counselors all drew their guns. Zero held the shovel out in front of him as if he were going to try to bat away the bullets. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Don't shoot him, said the warden. He can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation. So they don't want anything to happen to the boys, because then people really would question this detention center, wouldn't they? Zero kept backing up, out past the cluster of holes the boys had been digging, then farther and farther out onto the lake. He's going to have to come back for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of counselors helped Mr. Pendanski to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out to Zero, but he had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselors to take turns guarding the shower room and the rec room all day and all night. They were not to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, It's almost time for me to paint my nails again. What do you think she's going to paint her nails with? That rattlesnake venom. Before she left, she told the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. Climax. Holy moly. Zigzag and Zero just got into a fight. All the counselors came out, and now Zero has hit Mr. Pendanski, Mom, in the face with a shovel, knocked him out, and took off walking across the lake. And the warden says no more reading lessons, and they better not give Zero any water. I wonder what's going to happen to poor Zero? We'll find out in chapter 31, which will be the next video. Hopefully, Zero has someone come to his rescue. We'll see.